Hello everyone, this is Jeanette Milio. I do hope you enjoyed your second week in the class. Let's go and summarize some important points. And if you haven't done it yet, here is what needs to be done this week. You're going to read all the module sections, you watch the guest speaker interviews, and the case study videos and summary video, meaning this one, this very one you're watching right now. You're going to read chapter 7 in the Entertainment Finance Today book. And some activities are due. We have a quiz due, quiz 2, this Sunday night. We have a suggested assignment, which is an extra credit assignment about my movie, The Experiment, with Adrian Brody and Forrest Whitaker. This is extra credit. You don't have to do it, but you can do it for some points. And you can meet with your extra credit study group to do the pitch deck for a project you guys can come up with, and you will be pitching then by the end of the class. Distribution is the release of content on the distribution platforms available today, and those platforms include theaters, VOD, DVD, online, also streamers, and television. Distribution revenues reflect the value of content, meaning the value of a film or television project, in the worldwide marketplace, and that marketplace would include the US as well as foreign territories abroad. There are two entities we think about that are important to sell these distribution rights globally. One is a sales agent who sells distribution rights to US buyers and international buyers. And there is the distributor, who is actually the buyer. The distributor releases the content in theaters, on DVD, VOD, online, and television, depending on who the distributor is. The sales agent is not a distributor. The sales agent works on behalf of the producer and sells the rights for a film or television project for the producer. A distributor then would take the content and distribute it. If it's a theatrical movie, it would go into theaters, on DVD, VOD, online, and then television. If it's a television project like a TV show, it could go online, meaning it could be done for a streamer, and it could go on a television network. Obviously, television series are not theatrically released, and therefore that revenue stream from theatrical distribution is not part of the equation with television shows. Let's talk about theatrical distribution and the various options that are available to a producer when it comes to releasing a film in the theaters. First, we want to separate between the kinds of releases. There is a wide release, which is normally a release that is done by a major studio on 1,000 to 3,000 or more screens. And there is the limited release, which can also be done by a studio, but is often done by a mini major or a US distributor, and that release is up to 1,000 screens. There is the option to actually rent a studio, meaning the producer would raise the P&A and would provide it for the studio to then manage the release campaign. So it's really the producer's responsibility to come up with the P&A, and he would hire the studio to do the distribution and marketing services, and then manage the entire release campaign for the film. The advantage is that the film has a theatrical release in the US and is therefore worth more internationally and could make more in license fees coming from international territories. The other option that the producer has is four-walling. This is basically like renting a studio, just without the studio. In this case, the producer would hire a releasing company, like for example Freestyle Releasing, to do the work of handling the campaign and doing the release. And then there is the option to do a license deal. What that means is the producer would sell the US rights to either a major or a mini major, and they would pay a license fee, a minimum guarantee payment for those rights. And then the studio or the mini major can decide if they want to release the movie theatrically or not, and if they want to spend the P&A or not. But in this case, the producer receives an upfront payment for the movie that's then basically owned by the studio or mini major who buys the domestic rights. And these rights can also include other domestic rights. For example, DVD, VOD, television, online streaming rights. They're not just a license for theatrical distribution necessarily. And then there is a pickup deal, which is when the producer sells the idea of a film or a finished film to a US distributor and then assigns all rights and revenues to them. So this could be basically a producer pitching an idea to a studio, and the studio says, we love it, we'll do it. Or the producer might have already produced a movie independently, for example, and then the studio or major or US distributor or any distributor really buys the movie and buys all rights in relation to the movie. When a film gets theatrically released in the US, chances are it's also going to get theatrically released internationally. This could go two ways. For example, if a US studio does a US release, the foreign divisions of that studio would likely also handle the international theatrical release. Now there's also the option that the US studio just does the US release, maybe because they were rented as a studio, or they bought the license, or it was a split rights deal where the studio owns the US rights and then the producer owns the foreign rights. In that case, the producer can handle the international distribution rights through a sales agent, and the sales agent would then sell the theatrical rights to foreign distributors. When we talk about a TV show, it's similar. In the US, the TV show would be aired maybe on a streamer and a network, and then internationally, it would be sold to international networks. International distribution rights are sold through sales agents who represent the project on behalf of the producer and sell international distribution rights to foreign buyers. And these international distribution rights include theatrical rights, DVD, VOD, streamer rights, other online rights, and of course television rights. International sales agents conclude pre-sales, which are distribution agreements that are signed before a film is finished, before it's actually being produced. And international sales agents also conclude sales, which are distribution agreements that are concluded after the film is finished. So pre-sales again are distribution deals that are signed before the film is produced, and sales are distribution deals that are signed after the film is produced. These are likely the same deals, they just happen at a different time. And then the foreign distributor rights, in the case of pre-sales, pay, for example, an installment of a down payment between 10 and 20%, and then when the film is being delivered to them, they will pay the balance between 80 and 90%. And then the foreign distributors release the film theatrically on DVD, VOD, online, and on TV. And they don't have to release it theatrically. They don't actually have to release it on anything at all if they don't want to. They do buy those rights in many cases, and then they decide what the value is for them locally and how they want to handle the local release in order to make money. And if they do a good release and the film really does have a success in the box office, they don't just pay the minimum guarantee that is due based on the license agreement, they also pay overages. So what that means is that the producer does not have the box office risk because the distributor pays before they release the film. But if the film does well, the producer participates. A fairly large part of the industry today is online distribution with the streamers. And we as producers can create content to be sold to the streamers and be streamed by the streamers. There are really two kinds of streamers if you want. One are the studio-owned and the other ones are the independent. And of course, with all the various mergers and acquisitions and shifts and changes going on constantly, this can all change. Right now, the studio-owned streamers are Disney+, Hulu, Peacock, Discovery+, HBO Max, Paramount+, just to name the main ones. And the independent streamers today are Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Crackle, Vudu, Roku, Spectrum, DirecTV, and some others that are smaller streamers. And the streamer business model is basically one that, on the one hand, deals with subscription, and on the other end, deals with ad revenues. And then there's also the combination of both. Hulu, for example, is a streamer that does a subscription-based revenue as well as an ad-based revenue. So you can watch Hulu with limited advertising and pay a subscription. You can also pay a larger subscription and watch no advertising. What the streamers do today is that they really want to brand their content and make it exclusive. They want the audience to come to them based on something that only they have. And they want to retain the audience by doing content that can be binge watched. That's why a lot of the major studios have pulled their content from the Netflixes and so forth to have it exclusively available on their own major studio divisions for platforms. And that means that the independent streamers have to create their own content and make it worthwhile for subscribers to pay to see this content. So they are very much into branding a special kind of content and branding themselves through that content. What some of the streamers have begun to do is that they groom their own talent, meaning they have exclusive writers that only work for them, exclusive showrunners that only work for them. They're now beginning to cast actors and really groom them to become their own version of A-level actors just for their streamers, and they would be exclusive to them as well. So it's a little bit like what the studio was doing in the golden age when they contracted actors and directors to be working for them exclusively. What the streamers are also doing right now, they are very strong in the US, but they are already beginning to stream outside of the US and to expand abroad. And here's some deals that can be done by producers with streamers. Obviously, the pickup deal is always an option for a producer to pitch an idea to a streamer, and the streamer says, we like it, we're going to produce it, we're going to finance it, we're going to distribute it. And then the producer gets a rights fee and maybe a producer fee. But the producer will not hold any further rights. The copyright is going to be going to the streamer. There's a co-production deal, which is also similar to a split rights deal, where the streamer says, we will own the US in perpetuity, meaning forever, including all rights, and you can have and hold the foreign rights. Some streamers buy more than the US. For example, Netflix is very strong in some of the European territories and often acquires those in addition to the US. There is a license deal component as well. Like any buyer who buys international rights, a streamer can just do the same. Or like a US distributor buys US rights, a streamer could just do that as well. So streamers become license buyers, their acquisition department buys license deals just as you would sell a license to a US distributor or a network, for example, or an international distributor. So they do the same license deals. And then there are revenue share deals. The revenue share deal is done in a way that the streamer is not going to pay a minimum guarantee to you, but they will share whatever revenue is generated on the streaming platform with the producer. When we work with television today, we are producing television series, we are producing reality series, we are producing documentary series, we're producing scripted or non-scripted content. We might be also producing TV movies. And there are various options to be working with television networks today. So when we work with television, we work with broadcast networks, cable networks, and we also work with the premium networks. And how are television distribution revenues handled? For example, if a foreign or domestic theatrical distributor buys all rights, which include television, they will then sell the television rights to a television network to refinance and recoup the minimum guarantee that they have paid to the producer for those rights. So for distributors, this is kind of a recoupment mechanism to sell television rights, which they may not need because it might just be a theatrical distributor who doesn't have a network station. So a lot of times theatrical rights are bought and then they're going to be resold to a local network. The networks do, when it comes to films, have some niche product happening. So if you look at Hallmark, for example, they always have these nice, light, fluffy, lovely, family-like films, Lifetime, similar. So there are, when it comes to TV movies, certain networks that do low-budget films that will meet their audience and feel like they're branded for their network. And of course, as mentioned earlier, networks buy scripted and non-scripted content, which they buy either as a commission, as a co-production, or as a license deal. Some of these networks have now expanded into streaming territory. That means the network might also buy the streaming rights from you, or from the producer, that is. Release windows represent the path of a release, meaning what is released on what distribution platform at what time. So when we look at these release windows, we notice that first in line would be the exclusive theatrical release, which starts right from the beginning when the movie is produced and finished and delivered, up to about 4 months. Now obviously this can change. If the movie is not very good, then it's not going to stay in theaters that long. The international exploitation kind of works after that. So it could be that some theatrical movies are released right away in international territories, and some movies are just released a little later after the release in the US has taken place. DVD follows right after theatrical release in the territories where DVD is still a thing. And then after that, you're going to have a pay-per-view possible release, which is after the theatrical release. And then we're going online and on VOD. And we are looking at this release schedule, which looks like basically covers a 2-year schedule. And last in line is the television release. Now, you've noticed that recently these release windows have kind of melted together. We hear a lot about simultaneous release, meaning a movie gets released in the theaters and also on a streaming platform or on a pay-per-view VOD kind of scenario. This is often done these days, and we're also seeing that theatrical release timing, meaning the length of a theatrical release in the theaters, has become much shorter. So with these shortening and melting together kind of release windows, everything kind of moves up. So that means that the television release is not likely going to be 2 years after the theatrical release. It could be just a few weeks or a few months after the theatrical release. Given that distribution is the source of financing, it is the source of revenues for us, it is very important to understand and really know about some of the pitfalls. When we look at distribution, we look at these two entities. We look at sales agents and distributors. Sales agents sell distribution rights to distributors, and distributors release the content on the distribution platforms that they control in their territory. With sales agents, we have to do a few things to make sure that revenue comes in and that it comes in at a certain time and during a certain period. So one thing I have suggested to you, which is something I do, is I put a performance clause in the agreements with the sales agents that basically dictates, or we both agree, there's no such thing like dictating, but we both agree how much money they believe they can make with the sale of distribution rights by what time. I also talk to them about sales fees and expenses, and the idea is obviously to keep them low and keep them feasible. In many cases, you have sales estimates that were issued and they turn out not to be correct, which is something that happens. It's not necessarily the fault of a sales agent, because a market can shift, and sales agent that were projecting something today could be projecting something else in 6 months. But it could be that the sales agent was a little more flowery, for lack of a better word, than he should have been, and wasn't really conservative in projecting the numbers realistically. Another issue we're facing with sales agents is if they are simply incompetent to do any pre-sales. It could be for two reasons. They could just be really incompetent and lazy, or it could very well be that the project does not find a market demand and that people are just not buying it because it's not what they're looking for right now. The revenue protection is essential, which means the sales agent should not be the one receiving distribution revenues. Distribution revenues should be sent to a neutral party, which is a collection agent. You can kind of compare a collection agent with an escrow agent, meaning it is not the sales agent that holds on to the distribution revenues and at some point makes a report, and hopefully that report is correct. It is actually a neutral escrow kind of agent that is paid by the distributors, and that escrow agent, will basically just issue a report immediately. Correct reporting with sales agents is always a little bit of an issue in my personal experience, which is why it is good to have someone neutral who has no agenda doing the reporting. The other issue we have with sales agents is that most of them are not bankable. If we're not working with a bankable sales agent, we can't really do anything with their sales estimates. They're useless to us when it comes to obtaining a bank loan. We also have to make sure that when we are giving our sales agent a piece of content, a film or a television show, that it matches their lineup. A lineup is the products that they're selling from other producers at the same time, meaning when they go to the Cannes Film Festival, the question we would have is, what other films are you selling? And are you selling a lot of other films? In which case my film might just be drowning because there's too much going on. Or are you selling films that are really not like my film at all, which means buyers might not even come to you as a sales agent to look for something because they wouldn't know to find the kind of product that I have produced and you're selling. Simply meaning the sales agent is known for a certain kind of product, and that's the kind of product they are selling, which needs to match the product that we're producing. The ideal thing with sales agency agreements is to not have them have a very long term, because if they are exclusive, and if they're exclusive for a long term and the sales agent doesn't really do much with the movie, we're basically losing money and we cannot recoup our investment. So it is better to have a shorter term sales agreement, as short as it's possible, and then be very defined in regards to the rights. So the sales agent shouldn't really get any rights. They only get the right, the exclusive right to sell the content, but they're not actually getting distribution rights. There should be a provision made, if possible, that if a sales agent, for example, would have a bankruptcy issue or would go bankrupt, that there is a way to remove our film out of the bankruptcy mess, meaning out of the assets. And there are ways to do that in an agreement. Now, when it comes to distributors, we're often dealing with high distribution fees and expenses, as we've seen with our Harry Potter example in an earlier module. So the job we have to do as producers and investors is to make sure that these fees are kept as low as possible and that the profit definitions are not confusing, meaning a distributor should just deduct certain costs that they have, and that should be a distribution fee that is defined, it's a percentage, and a distribution expense that is defined as a percentage, and that should be all that should be deducted. Sometimes distributors pay late or not at all, and that's an issue in general. Doesn't happen very often, but it sometimes happens. And the main issue that we're all facing is the overage reporting. It is not easy to figure out how much money did the distributor in a country really make and how much did they spend, and should I, as the producer, get overages. You would actually have to go there and check all their books locally. You are getting a minimum guarantee payment, so you are making money right away. And sometimes it's really not worth, flying to a country in Europe and figuring out what kind of overages are actually applicable here. But there are people that do this, and there are actually special auditing firms that do this. The extended terms and rights refers to the fact that distributors should have a first run right that might be anywhere between 5 to 15 years, and then might buy for another second run again. The rights are very defined as to what they're buying. Are they buying theatrical rights, television rights, DVD rights, streamer rights, or maybe they're just buying television rights? So those rights are going to be very, very defined. And some distributors are known for pirating. If you sell a movie in China, China is known for pirating movies. So this is not a territory you want to sell first. Territories that are known for pirating should be sold last or not at all. When we talk about sales estimates, we're also talking about projections that we use to base our finance plan on. Sales estimates are projected international distribution revenues. And the take estimates, which are the low estimates, are used to value a film or TV show and its available collateral. Bankers, meaning senior lenders and junior lenders, as well as equity investors, look at this collateral, look at the take estimates to decide how much money they want to invest and how much money they want to lend. Pre-sales are distribution agreements concluded before a film or TV show is finished, I should say precisely is produced. And they are used to verify the market demand, meaning if you have a script and you have a great actor and a great director, and based on these elements, no distributor is buying, there is usually an issue with the project that should be revisited, and maybe the project needs to be repackaged or the script needs to be changed, something needs to happen. It's a conversation to be had with the sales agent who will likely get feedback from the distributor as to why they're not buying. Sales or distribution agreements concluded after the film is finished. Pretty straightforward. Unsold rights are sales estimates that were projected minus pre-sales that were actually made. So when you have a sales estimate projection sheet and you take pre-sales out of that, you're basically removing collateral from the collateral pool. And the unsold rights is the remaining collateral that, for example, a bank or a senior lender can use to give you a gap loan against these unsold rights. Sales estimates and pre-sales are to happen at a certain level to project profitability or potential revenues for a film or television project. Sales estimates are international sales projection established by a sales agent reflecting the potential distribution revenues for a film or television project. These potential distribution revenues derive from international distributors who purchase an exclusive distribution license to release the film or TV show in their territory on their platforms. A pre-sale is a distribution agreement that is concluded before a film is produced or a TV show is produced and ready to be delivered to the distributor. Pre-sales reflect the current value of a film in the marketplace. They give you a direct and immediate confirmation whether or not the film meets the market demand. Now, how do we use sales estimates for funding? Sales estimates are projected international distribution revenues. And in order for a film project to make sense and to suggest profitability, those numbers need to be at a certain level in the take case, which means the low case. And I, in my experience in producing various films and have invested a lot of money into those films, have figured out that 70 to 75% of my budget needs to be projected to come back from the international distribution territories. This is obviously not covering the budget, but it covers quite a bit of the budget, and it helps me to establish a financial model for my investors that is profitable. And pre-sales, which are distribution agreements concluded before a film is finished or produced, they are used, as I mentioned earlier, to verify the market demand and tell me, is the market looking for the kind of product or the kind of film or TV show that I'm making right now? Or is my timing off, or is my everything off? I do need to check this, and I do always check myself to make sure I'm not entirely off when I'm working on a project. So pre-sales for me and for anyone, and especially investors, is a very important tool to understand the current market demand. Now here too, in order for this to be financially feasible and to make sense and to work as a risk mitigation strategy, the minimum should be 30 to 35% of the budget. And you have to think about it this way. If you make a movie that's $5 million and you're not able to even sell a third of this movie up front, why would you be doing the movie? You're already getting a signal that people don't want to buy this. So it's a very important thing to remember. Unsold rights are the rights that I have available after I take my sales estimates and have sold my pre-sales. The unsold rights are the rights that I still have available at the time the movie is produced to sell. So I have to look at this collateral and figure out, Can I use this for something? And is it enough for my equity investor? Is it enough for my junior lender? And the bank and the junior lender and the equity investor, they will obviously look at the sales estimates after the pre-sales were made to see if there is enough money for them to give me a loan. I could get a gap loan for unsold rights. I could get a junior loan if after these unsold rights are taken as a collateral by the bank. And if there's still enough collateral available for the junior lender, how much money would they give me? And then the same for my equity investor. The equity investment, I have learned, is better to be kept at maximum 35% of the budget. I know this sounds rough, but we're going to learn about finance plans that make this absolutely possible. So when an equity investor finances 35% of the budget, pre-sales are done at about the same range, and international sales estimates are in the 70 to 75 range, there is a very strong possibility that this movie is going to have favorable returns for the investor and is going to be profitable also for the producer. When I financed and produced my film The Experiment, starring Academy Award winning actors Adrien Brody and Forest Whitaker, directed by Paul Schöring, who has done the series Prison Break, it was a remake of the German Academy Award winning film Das Experiment. And I was at the time working under the budget of about $12 million. My pre-sales at the time were $5,116,000, which was about 42% of my budget. And I received, I believe it was around 20% in down payments. And then I got a bank loan from Comerica, and all my costs and loan fees were about 9.5%. So I got a pre-sale loan for these pre-sales of $3,863,000, which was the portion that I had available to use in my finance plan and to cover my production costs. The next thing that happens is the bank took a look at my unsold rights, which at the time, if I look at this correctly, with the total estimates of $9,170,000 and pre-sales of $5,116,000, ended up being about $4 million. Because my unsold rights were $4,053,000, my gap loan was 50% of that, which is $2,026,000. So what the lender does, they look at the unsold rights and they are doing half of that as a gap loan, but only up to 20% of the budget. So if I would have had a lot more unsold rights and the gap loan could have been a lot higher than 20% of the budget, I still wouldn't have gotten it. So my gap loan at the time was about $2 million. I paid the bank interest, so I ended up with about 1.8 to cover my production budget. So altogether, I got a bank loan of about $5.6 million, which is nearly half of my budget. And then I did work with the Iowa State tax incentive at the time, which unfortunately no longer exists, but it was a great incentive at the time. And I used an incentive lender who was able to cash flow the incentive before I was actually spending the money. So they look at an estimate of what I would be spending in that region once I'm done filming. They take that estimate and they give me an advance. And they're charging me, of course, a big fee. So 25% of that incentive went to the lender, but I was able to use $2.7 million for my finance plan up front. So my equity investment of the $12 million budget was actually only 25% of the budget, so only $2.9 million. And that's a very strong finance plan because it kept my risk very low as the equity investor, and I got a very commercial movie made. So I have a suggested assignment for you. If you look at the finance plan of my movie, The Experiment, and let's assume that you would have had $500,000 more in estimates. So your sales estimates wouldn't be $9,170,000. They would actually be $9,670,000. And you would run that scenario using all the same elements that you just saw in my finance plan. You would just look at how much more gap can I get? How is it changing the finance plan? And then what I'd want you to tell me is how this change would impact the equity investment. What would the new equity investment be if the budget stays the same? So you can use the Excel sheet that I have provided in the module to make those adjustments, and you can feel free to send the suggested assignment in on the due date, which is Sunday, and then let me know what you come up with and make some extra credit points.